Hi, everybody. Welcome in. We're going to wait another minute or so before we begin to give people time to get logged in. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today for the next program in our Taking Action Together series. My name is Amy McDonald, and I'm the Director of Education at the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. I want to say a huge thank you to Larry and Cinda Goldberg, Jeffrey and Gail Baer, Ronnie and Donald Hess for their incredible sponsorship of this program. We have many partners who've helped us spread the word, and all of that's going to be listed on our website. And I'm very thankful for our team, Hannah and Lisa, for helping with all the details, big and small, for today's program. A few quick housekeeping items. We're going to be saving time at the end of the presentation so our speaker can answer a few questions. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Click on the button and begin to submit your questions. So the program is going to be recorded, and we hope you'll share it with your friends who were not able to attend today. We're happy to provide these events at no cost. And if you enjoy today's program, we would greatly appreciate a donation of any size that will enable us to continue providing this important content. You can visit our website to easily make a gift, and we'll put a link in the chat. Now to tell you more about today's program. A crucial component of delivering Nazi racial ideology to the masses was the use of propaganda. In this session, we will be examining propaganda deployed by the Nazis to discriminate against Jews and other minorities. Participants are also going to learn how propagandists utilize the media to spread their message and how to be aware of the role of propaganda in our world today. And it's a huge honor, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce to you Jennifer Goss. So let me read you some of Jen's background info. Jennifer Goss is a program manager for Echoes and Reflections, a joint partnership of the ADL, USC Shoah Foundation, and Yad Vashem that provides resources for educators nationwide. A 19-year veteran social studies teacher, she holds a master's degree in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Westchester University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in American History from Pace University. She serves on the board of the Virginia Holocaust Museum. In addition to her classroom teaching, Jennifer is a USHMM Teacher Fellow 2010 and served as the inaugural Williston Reads Project Fellow for the USC Shoah Foundation. She is the producer of the Emmy-nominated Holocaust documentary, Misha's Fugue. Recently, Jennifer authored a chapter in the University of Wisconsin press release, Teaching and Understanding the Holocaust, and served as a member of the Virginia Commission to Combat Anti-Semitism. Our goal in holding these programs is to provide you all with at least one thing you can take away and put into action. And after hearing today's program, I'm confident you will find at least one thing you can do. Jen has all of this wonderful background information, and I'm also honored to say she's a dear friend, someone that I can count on throughout the years and look to for guidance and support. And I'm really excited to bring her here today. We all are. So Jen, please take it away.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to work with you and the team. at the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. And it's also great to have so many of you joining us today. I see some familiar faces, including one that links back to my introduction to Amy, which is Stanley Stahl and her amazing program at the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, of which I'm also a proud Alfred J. Lerner Fellow. So it's always great to see those connections fostered through the years as we do this important work in the field. So I'm here to talk to you today about the power of propaganda, and I can think of few more important topics as we head into the year 2024. But before we get into how all of this impacts the present, we're going to take a journey backwards into the past. In fact, we are going to go back to the year 1944, which is hard to believe that it was 80 years ago. The events that we're going to be talking about here at the beginning of today's program. And we're going to travel specifically to Theresienstadt, or Terezin, as was its original Czech name. Many of you may already know that starting in June of 1942, Nazi Germany deported many Jewish Germans and Austrians, as well as Jewish citizens of Czechoslovakia, to the camp/ghetto of Terezin. And their targets were predominantly older adults, 65 years of age and older, World War I veterans who were either severely disabled due to war wounds, or those who had won, items of merit such as the Iron Cross First Class and above, and other individuals of prominence from this region, artists, musicians, cultural figures. By this point, the Reich's justification for deporting Jews to the East was for work. And the Nazis, promoted Terezin as a spa town or facility where individuals who were older or injured or unable to work could, quote, retire in safety. And additionally, in anticipation of questions about, the disappearances of these individuals, many of whom were prominent public figures from their towns, the Reich assigned Terezin as an official place of residence in their records. And so, in addition to the Jews from the regions that I already mentioned, there were also Jews deported to Terezin from other surrounding countries, including Denmark. And in October of 1943, Danish leaders insisted that the Danish Red Cross be permitted to visit these deportees firsthand to gather information on their treatment in Terezin. And so the Nazis officially authored a visit for representatives of the International Red Cross to take place on June 23rd, 1944. When the Red Cross arrived at Terezin, they saw a model settlement, an active cultural life for people that lived there, from cafes to, soccer pitches and operatic performances. And so I'm going to share with you now some images that are not from the exact visit itself, but from screenshots of a film that was produced in the wake of this successful visit, because these individuals were fooled. They reported back that things looked good. The treatment of the people that were here, seemed to be on the up and up. And so these images that you're going to look at now are likely quite similar to what the visitors from the Red Cross saw just days prior. So I'd like you to just take a moment, and as I share these images with you, just scan the image. What do you see? At the bottom, by the way, that's a time code from the original film footage. But what do you see? What's going on here? Who are the people? How are they dressed? What does the facility look like? I'm just going to show you a handful of images. So here is the first one. Here is the second. Woman in a pottery studio. Here's the third. The fourth. And then our final image. And so just take a moment, what do you see? What's going on here? And some of you might be familiar with this tool, Menti. It's a great little, interactive polling tool that I'm going to invite you now to, if you have a device nearby, or if you're adept at navigating, through multiple screens on your browser tab, you can click on the link in the chat box, or you can go to menti.com and type in the code that you see on the screen. If you haven't clicked directly on the link in the chat box and you go to menti.com, you type in the code 7790 7020. And in one word, I'd like you to just react to the images that you just saw. What did you see on the screen? What stood out to you? Just one word. If you had to describe these images, what comes to mind? And I'm going to pause my screen just to not prejudice anybody's response. What's your impression? Now, many of us, of course, are coming into today's presentation with a substantial depth of history related to this subject area, but what do you see? I see a couple responses already, so I'm going to give time for just another few moments for people to share their thoughts. All right, so we've got, normalcy, normal. We have, happy, relaxed, clean. Normal seems to be kind of taking the lead here. And so, this was the image that the Nazis wanted to promote with the propaganda film that they created. They dubbed the film "The Führer Gives the Jews a City." It sounds like just such a marvelous thing that the Nazi German regime was doing for these people. Of course, we know that the reality was quite the opposite. And so we're fortunate, through our collection of history, to have testimonies of individuals who were actually there, who were on the ground, who saw the filming take place, and who lived to tell about their experiences. And the gentleman that is on my screen right now, Eric Nash, is one such individual. Eric is a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust who gave his testimony to the USC Shoah Foundation. And he was interned for a period of time in the Theresienstadt ghetto. And he is going to share with us in this piece of testimony right now what he actually saw.
And then something happened. This miserable, stinking, hungry, dysentery-plagued place overnight was built up to be a beautiful town. They started to make a park with a gazebo in it, and in this gazebo was a music band playing music in the afternoon. People were strolling in the park, dressed much better. There were a street with a coffee house. There was no coffee, but there was a coffee house. There was a bank. There was no money, but there was a bank with stores. And there were little playgrounds for children. There was a soccer field. I mean, things that was unbelievable. And we knew this is all phony and baloney because our life didn't become, our rations didn't become bigger. But we knew what it was all about because we were told there will be a movie crew to come in to film for the outside world what a wonderful gift Hitler gave to the Jews, that he gave them a town which is more or less like a retirement place. By the way, the Germans that came with transports were under the opinion that they came to a retirement place. They were told in Germany, they were given the order to pay, I don't know how many thousands of marks, because it is for their retirement in Theresienstadt, and that they will have their apartment and they have their cleaning crew, and everything was promised to them. For them, that was quite a shock when they saw what they came into. So this crew of the Red Cross came from Denmark and filmed these Potemkin villages. It was just a facade, and it took them a week to make this movie. And we had to parade in front of the bank and the coffee house, and we had to listen to the concerts. And then they were finished with their work. It was quite obvious that they don't believe what they saw. But they went, and in this moment, all of Theresienstadt crumbled and was destroyed. Because from this moment on, every day, transport after transport left, and Theresienstadt was emptied out.
So Eric gives us a powerful glimpse into the history. Of course, you can tell, from what he
And then
experienced,
something happened.
that he wasn't entirely clear of the distinction between the Nazi German film crew and the visitors from the Red Cross. But the other layers that he shares with us really kind of help get a sense of, how much of an elaborate ruse was created for propagandistic purposes. And, this is just one example of the lengths that Nazi Germany went to deceive people as to what was really happening. And so we're going to be looking today at other layers of Nazi deception, as well as other ways that the Nazis utilized propaganda as a vehicle to deliver their ideology. And so we're going to just now take a look at what exactly propaganda is. Propaganda, by definition of common sense media, is false or partly false information intended to shape people's opinion and create an action that fulfills the propagandist's intent. So propaganda comes from the Latin word to propagate or spread. And so, it's being used to shape and spread ideas, and to manipulate people's actions and their beliefs and their attitudes to further the propagandist's goal. And propaganda can be used to spread messages that may seem harmless, to get people to, believe that a certain product is best. But propaganda also, crucially that we're aware of this, is used for messages that can motivate people to perform acts of hatred or do things that, scapegoat people in society, that can lead to isolation, persecution, and of course, in the realm of the Holocaust, an even worse fate. Propaganda, as I mentioned, is a vehicle to deliver an ideology, a set of shared beliefs or a system of ideas that organize one's goals and expectations and actions. And like propaganda, ideologies can have both positive and negative influences in society. For example, feminism is an ideology and it advocates for rights and equality for women. But so too was Nazism, an ideology. And of course, that promoted harmful racist and nationalistic views that led to mass destruction during the era of the Second World War. So one of the reasons why I think learning about propaganda through the lens of Nazi Germany can be beneficial to us as individuals is it's really difficult to start a conversation, whether it be in a classroom or in a setting with friends and family, or in I wouldn't think you would really want to venture there in a workplace setting, but sometimes these topics do come up in the work that many of us do in various spaces. It can be really tough to talk about propaganda that people are seeing today. The propaganda that is being distributed in our society today evokes emotions within us that, operate across a couple different levels, and we're going to talk about some of those levels, but it's something that we are very connected to. When we see propaganda around political campaigns, we often have very strong reactions, either positively or negatively, that other people in our space may not reciprocate. And so if you start to have a conversation about how propaganda works and how it deceives us and so on and so forth, and you're using present day examples, you often run the risk of alienating the people that you are in conversation with. And so I have always found it to be much more effective to talk about what propaganda is, how propaganda works through the lens of the past, to get the information out there, and then allow people to make their own connections and hopefully apply those learnings to things that they're seeing in the present day. And it may take several conversations, and it may, take time for the person to recognize what they're seeing, to critically analyze what is coming into their spaces. But the hope is that if we go in with information and education, that eventually those lessons will take root and people will become more aware of the media that they are consuming. So I'm going to start off with how propaganda works. Like what are the basic things that propaganda does to get this information out there? And these, 6 basic pieces are on the screen now, and we're going to be looking at examples of these pieces through Nazi German propaganda. Propaganda repeats the same information over and over. Through that repetition, the message is planted in one's mind, and then eventually the hope of the propagandist is that it will take root. It uses accessible media, things that are there that are already part of our lives, and are not things that we're seeking out using extraordinary measures. So accessible media. It twists and exploits the truth. Propaganda, the most successful propaganda, often has a root in something that is factual, at least to a degree. And then it twists and exploits that truth to take advantage of what individuals believe to be the case. It appeals to people's emotions. Oftentimes when we are acting on our emotions, we don't always engage in thinking about, okay, how much of this is actually true? How should I be reacting? When you're threatening someone's livelihood or their children or making them feel that they're in danger, people tend to act much more abruptly and follow along with what the propagandist wants them to do more than if they take the time to process and think about what they're seeing. It also gives the illusion that most people agree with its message, that if you don't jump on, board with the message, that you're going to be missing out. And it also talks to people in their own language. The most effective propaganda doesn't use big words and long phrases. It operates in a way that, people can take that message in quite easily, understand what's being said, and then, react in the way that they, are being asked to react by the propagandist. So the first piece I want to take a look at is repeating the same information over and over. Unfortunately, through the years, some of us in our lifetimes, people have heard the message that the Jews killed Jesus. This was not a new idea in Nazi Germany in 1930s and 1940s Europe. This was a message that had been being given since the time of Christ. And here, this particular image taken from the children's book, The Poisonous Mushroom, which we'll talk more about in just a moment, the caption below the picture reads, "Whenever you see a crucifix, think of the horrible murder of Jesus by the Jews." The Nazis used this common belief among Christians to alienate Jews. Nazi ideology, although it had its own, mixed relationship with religion, it viewed this message as a way of taking Christians who had respect for Judaism, and Judaism is the basis of Christianity, and further driving a wedge into that belief system. We see these beautiful German children, blonde-haired children, a mother, they appear to be of, some type of peasant, hardworking background, and they are looking upon the crucifix, thinking about the fact that the Jews allegedly killed Jesus. Now, we know, of course, today that that is not historically what occurred. but that message rooted in biblical history and the teachings of churches, including the Catholic Church, into the 1960s. Although I personally had an experience where in the 1980s, I had an elderly nun who told me in catechism class that the Jews killed Jesus. She didn't get the memo, as they say. This was a message that had been used through the centuries and is again being exploited here to further drive a wedge between Christian and Jewish neighbors. Propaganda uses accessible media. On the left, we're looking at some of the forms of media that were prominent in 1930s Nazi Germany. The radio, the people's radio, rallies where speeches are being given, the Der Stürmer, the newspaper, which we're going to hear a very poignant testimony about in just a short while. Films like The Eternal Jew, the children's book, The Poisonous Mushroom, Der Giftpilz. The Nazi propaganda machine was so thorough that they were even indoctrinating school children. And this book focuses on a comparison, between Jews and mushrooms, as the mother tells the child, just as it is difficult to distinguish between a poisonous mushroom and an edible mushroom, it is difficult to distinguish between a good Jew and a lying, thieving Jew. And that image on the previous screen is one of the images from this book. We're going to be seeing some other images from the poisonous mushroom and other children's books from this era as well that show us this, propagandistic intent of the Nazi regime. And today we have television news. We also have a plethora of social media, through the television, not necessarily through the news, although some news channels today have gotten into delivering propaganda as news, but, on the television and in the devices that we hold in our hands, propaganda is constantly assaulting us. And so, the propagandists of 2024 are using very accessible media. Propaganda twists and exploits the truth, going back to that concept of the Jews killing Jesus. We know that Judas gave up Jesus to the Roman Emperor Pontius Pilate, but the reality of the matter is the Jews themselves, they were not the ones who made the decision to crucify Christ. And, just taking that myth through history and, rooted in the fact that, Jesus himself was Jewish, and where this comes from, twisting and exploiting that truth gets us into this theme of propaganda. Propaganda appeals to people's emotions. The first time I saw this image, I didn't fully know the context. As a young Holocaust educator, I didn't know much at that time about the blood libel and the fact that there was this myth that Jews kidnapped Christian children to use their blood to make matzah and Passover. But the very first thing I thought of when I saw this image as a young educator was, oh, you don't want to take candy from strangers. And here we're playing on people's emotions. We have these young, adorable German children, and we have this evil-looking man who is exemplified with these stereotypical Jewish features. And under the picture, the caption says, "Here, my little one, you get something sweet, but as a reward, you must come with me." And so, it portrays this evil elderly Jew trying to tempt these small children. And, it just relies on the basic fear of parents. You're afraid that something is going to happen to your children, that someone is going to take your children away, this stranger danger concept. And here the Jew is portrayed as this dark, evil, threatening, manipulative stranger, as opposed to these pure, innocent Aryan children. And we're appealing to the emotions, not of parents, but of anyone, who values children in a society. Propaganda gives the illusion that most people agree with its message. The Nazi regime was famous for constantly displaying media about the rallies that it held and the massive crowds of people that attended and came and supported and cheered for the speeches that were being made. This just kind of overall belief of like everybody supports this and everybody is going along with it, and therefore so should you. And lastly, it talks to people in their own language. Yes, there is text with this, with these image, but it is showing through this poster, which also was used in some children's literature, that we have, the Jew on the right is an ugly, greedy individual controlling the media and the stock exchange. He's got like a stock exchange newspaper called Burst in his pocket. His eyes are made to look suspicious. And then on the left, you see the hardworking, strong, stable, and honest Aryan. He's in great physical condition. He's got a direct look in his eye. He's, leaning on a shovel, showing that he's a hard worker. And so even without the text, the images themselves are very accessible, very easy to understand. And they're, again, doing some of the other things that we've already talking about. They twist and exploit the truth. Yes, there are Jews that worked in banking and finance, but there are also Jews in Germany and other areas of Europe that farm and do other pursuits. It's repeating some of the same old myths that have existed throughout history. So these are kind of the 6 basic tenets of propaganda. And if I want you to just pause for a moment, and I want you to think about some of the different things that you may see in society, that you may think about, that you may encounter, that are propaganda. Unfortunately, we all see far too much propaganda in our daily lives. And so I want you to just think about, some of these examples of propaganda that you've seen. And I want you to think about, what are some of the techniques that, those pieces of propaganda, have leveraged. Is it repeating the same message over and over? Is it using accessible media? What are some of the things that have been leveraged that you see in your daily life? All right, so propagandists also utilize some of the same techniques. So those are like the 6 core tenets of propaganda, but then we can also group propaganda into some specific strategies that are used. And these kind of tie into the 6 pieces that we previously talked about. They are bandwagon, thinking back to that Nazi party rally image that everybody agrees. There's also the famous Hitler campaign poster from his failed 1932 presidential bid, where it's also like everyone supports me and the hand is up in the air. And he's, the common folk are supporting, Adolf Hitler for president. There's testimonials. And now thinking to present day, have you ever bought a product because you've seen on television where perhaps a public figure that you admire is telling you like, yes, this particular organizational, planner changed my life and allowed me to get my life in order. Or maybe a friend says something to you, and you go out and buy a product, based on a testimonial. And so propagandists use testimonials as well. Like, you should vote for this political candidate because, they helped me when I returned from fighting abroad, get some things in my life straightened out. And so you should support them and you should vote for them because plain folks and bandwagon are very close. Bandwagon really focuses on the masses, whereas plain folks tries to show like the average everyday person promotes, or, supports this message. So it's not necessarily a massive group of people, but just someone who is like you. We also have, transfer. If you support one thing or support this idea, well, this other idea is something that you should also believe in or support as well. Fear and card stacking goes along with like playing on people's emotions. We unfortunately, in the aftermath of 9/11 or during the COVID-19 pandemic, saw a lot of, fear and card stacking style propaganda that was really just playing on, the things that we were very most afraid of in our society. And, that, this should, be something that you should be concerned about too, and that you should act upon as a result. Logical fallacies is the premise that individuals, this sounds like it should be true. Well, I'm not a doctor, and I'm reading this about this specific product, and it makes sense. So yeah, okay, I believe in that. Glittering generalities take a message and, amp it up, put pretty trappings on it, show the prettiest people using these things. And, oh, if you want to be just like this person who is amazing and wonderful, then you too should follow along on this message. And then there's just outright name calling. Scapegoating individuals or groups in society, blaming them. This, unfortunately, is a common feature of political campaigns. Collectively, these 8 different techniques, whether they're applied separately or some are applied in tandem, allow propagandists to, to put that message in someone's brain and hopefully stimulate them towards action. And the more effective the technique and the deployment of the technique, the quicker an individual is going to follow along with the message. People have a tendency, to buy into propaganda so fast. Doug asked that question in the chat box, because propaganda often tags along with a message that they already want to believe, or a message, that they're already hoping to hear. The best propaganda plays upon someone's pre-existing beliefs in order to get them to latch onto it very quickly, or something that they're very concerned about. People buy diet supplements because they want to be thin and they want to believe that they work. They don't always necessarily think about or do the medical research to determine if they actually do work and if they're safe. And so, that's one of the reasons why propaganda can be so effective. And propaganda can, have a very human impact. And I think, that's one of the things that I want to leave us with today is that, we see propaganda, and, many of us, are probably good at discerning when something is propaganda, most likely, or if we sit back and think about it, we can be good at discerning when it's propaganda. And we'll share some resources with you afterwards on ways to learn more and be more educated about how to decipher propaganda. But we don't always think about the fact that, at the end of the day, particularly with propaganda under regimes like the Nazis, propaganda doesn't only have an impact in getting its target audience to do what it wants to do. It also can have a very negative impact on the groups that are being scapegoated, that are being targeted. In the case of Nazi Germany, of course, propaganda sought to foster anti-Semitism and cause people to act out against their Jewish neighbors. And one of the most powerful pieces of testimony that I would ever use with my students is the one that I'm getting ready to show you right now from Esther Clifford, who grew up, she was a young German Jewish girl who grew up outside of Munich. And, in this clip of testimony, she's going to share her feelings on witnessing propaganda on her way to school. And she's going to talk about that. And I think for my students, what was always so effective about seeing this clip, and I'll share with you where you can access this clip if you'd like to share it with someone in your life. It shows that propaganda isn't just for me to consume and think about, but that it's going to have a very real impact on someone else. And that someone in this case is a young girl. So let's take a moment to listen to what Esther has to say.
As the years went by, like in 1934, there was a terrible paper being published. It was called the Stürmerzeitung, stormtrooper newspaper. Everything seemed to be stormtroopers, troopers. And that was a horrible paper. That affected me terribly because it was, it had all kinds, it was plastered on all these stores that sold newspapers. And in the morning, going to school, I would see this Stürmerzeitung and people standing and reading them. And what did they list in this Stürmerzeitung? They had people's faces with long noses and saliva running from their mouth and looking of course, typically, you know, they meant Jewish people because they always wrote about Jewish people with their long noses, and they were looking at little Gentile children, greedily looking at the money that the children had in their hands, like they wanted to steal the money from these children. And they had terrible stories in there that Jewish doctors trying to inject Gentiles with poisonous medication. They had bankers that would swindle Jews out of their money. And here I was walking to school, and people were actually reading this, and young people, old people, of all ages. And by the time I got to school, I couldn't learn.
And so, you know, our students or people in our lives that are sharing those funny memes, you know, that might be making fun of a certain group of people or somebody who has a different set of abilities, you know, those things are having an impact. And whether or not we're hearing about that impact is one thing, but they're having an impact, and they're having a negative impact on the very groups of people that they're targeting. And I think Esther's testimony really brings that story to light. In closing, I want to share with you a quote that many of you are likely familiar with from Joseph Goebbels. And he says, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the life. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." And so while you can replace the word state with other entities in society, the message that Goebbels tells us here is one that is incredibly important for us to consider as we navigate through the upcoming election season, or I should say the election season that we're in. And we see all, you know, measures of campaign ads from all sides coming to us through all of our forms of accessible media. As we navigate through the things that we see on social media that are being shared. And, you know, as I part ways with you today, I'm going to give you a couple things to think about. One, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but if you see something on social media, before hitting that share button, even if it's something that goes along with your pre-existing belief system, do some research. If you see a headline that just seems so outrageous about an oppositional political candidate that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they did this, but everybody needs to know about it, do some research, make sure it's real. Sometimes, unfortunately, or fortunately it is, but do the research before you hit that reshare button. To talk to the young people in your life, maybe tell them about Esther's story. And again, I'll make sure we share that link here with you in the page that Lisa and her team set up after, where you can watch this webinar recording and also share it in the chat box. But talk to the young people in your life, share Esther's story, or introduce them to Echoes and Reflections. My organization has a set of activities called Explore the Past, Shape the Future. And there are going to be 15 of them as of March 1st, but we have 10 right now. And the fifth one focuses on using media literacy skills to examine the Holocaust. It takes a very similar approach to the path that we took today. To, you know, not thinking about propaganda in the present, but looking at propaganda in the past. The activity brings in Esther's testimony and, you know, allows students to form an understanding of propaganda and its impact, and then asks them to create a public service announcement, educating people about why it's important to be media literate today. You know, as you navigate through life and through the things that we see, it's easy to get tired and worn out. But speak up, you know, talk to people about these messages, and perhaps, as I said, maybe engage them initially through the past, but allow them to foster connections to the present. Give them some food for thought, some things to walk away with from your conversation. With that, I'm going to share in the chat box for you now a couple of great resources to look at for further education related to, you know, media literacy and propaganda. One of my favorite sites is the Center for Media and Information Literacy, which is run out of Temple University. And that site is currently displayed on my screen, and I'm going to share a link to that for you in the chat box. This is just a great general site to give you a background, to learn more about, what it means to be media literate and to learn more about propaganda. I'm also going to share, for those of you that are educators, a link to Echoes and Reflections Unit 2, which looks at the history of anti-Semitism up through the Nazi era. And in this unit, we actually have a sub-unit on how to teach about Nazi propaganda. That subunit includes Esther Clifford's testimony, and I'm going to link,
like in 1930.
getting ahead of my link here. I'm going to link her testimony in the chat box for you as well. And so the team from AHEC is sharing these links with everyone. So thank you all. And, I encourage you to also think about, ways in which you can continue to learn more about propaganda and what it means today, to continue to read, to learn, and to educate others. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to today's program. All right, so
Jen, thank you so much. I'm looking in the Q&A. I think you've answered a couple of the questions. One that we haven't looked at yet. Did the Red Cross learn, early on you were talking about, did they ever recognize or make any kind of statement about that this was propaganda?
So initially, as we mentioned, they were fooled. In the aftermath, in the years after the war and more, and I apologize, my lab has decided there's something scary outside. In the years after the war, individuals that went on that site visit, did speak a bit about what they saw, and really still leaned into, well, I was looking at what I was seeing with what was presented to me. And yes, I was deceived, but, of course, after the war ends and everyone's aware of what has occurred, it's really easy to blame the Nazis and say, well, they didn't allow me to see other things. I couldn't go off into other areas and get a real sense of what was occurring. So they admitted, but most of the individuals didn't really fully, accept and seem completely remorseful that there was something that they could have done, which is unfortunate.
Okay, while we're waiting to see if there are any more questions, I thought of one, especially as a former educator, you too, think we always hear about just the increasing anti-Semitism, especially the amount of anti-Semitism online and in social media that young people are being exposed to. And you mentioned some of those resources, but just here up front, do you have what do you think is an effective way to deal with what young people are seeing and hearing today? I know it's a complicated question and an issue, but do you have any suggestions?
I think for me, one of the strategies, and Amy, I know this is a strategy that you employed as well, getting students to understand the human impact of history and the fact that, people that were targeted during the Holocaust, the Jews that were targeted, these were people that had lives just like us, and they were ordinary people. So humanizing, individuals before we victimize them and teach about that victim-centered aspect of the Holocaust is something that's really critical. ADL is actually getting ready to launch a new program called Awareness to Action, which seeks to help educate secondary students in the United States about Jewish life and identity and culture, and then also illuminate, how anti-Semitism shows up in today's spaces, because I think the vast majority of students, don't fully understand what it means to be Jewish and how, multifaceted that identity is. And they also don't fully understand, how anti-Semitism presents itself and how it shows up. I've had students through the years that made, what I would identify as anti-Semitic comments, but when called out about it and a discussion ensues, they didn't even realize necessarily the roots of where that comment came from. And so, just really continuing to educate wherever we can and whenever we can. And just to keep, to allow our students the tools to keep learning. I'm also putting a link out for y'all to share called Anti-Semitism Uncovered, which is a website of the ADL that looks at the different roots of the myths of anti-Semitism today. And it can be a great resource to push back on some of those common anti-Semitic tropes that come about in daily discourse by showing where those tropes originated, why they're not true, and how to get people to engage in turning against them. So that's another great resource as well. Great question.
I'm waiting to see if there are any more questions. Okay, I don't see any more. Well, Jen, that was just amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you for all the resources. Those are going to be really, really helpful. I wanted to, before we end, go ahead and tell everybody about our next program, our upcoming program. Our next program, it is called Drawing Strength from the Past, and it will feature speaker Ann Arnold from the Mark Schoenwetter Foundation. He's a Holocaust survivor. We're going to be announcing a very exciting program called Journey for the Living. So be sure to be there on March the 6th, noon Central Time, same as today. We will be continuing to add more and more programs that we hope you'll find of interest. Everybody that's here today and that registered, you will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording of the program. And we get our best traction by word of mouth. And we would really appreciate it if you would forward the recording on our schedule of programs. And if you think this program was valuable, your donations will help us continue this important education. So once again, Jen, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to be with us here today. We really appreciate it. It was very valuable, very thought-provoking, and very powerful. So thank you. And we look forward to seeing everyone again soon on March the 6th. And thank you for being with us today. Bye, everybody.